in Hein Schomburg. I don't have PowerPoints, so that too. This is a nightmare. I know. This is going to be my lesson. Always bring PowerPoints. They have to show that instead. Okay, so I am going to talk about developing and integrating current events into an online course, and because I teach Psychology of Racism online, that's the one I chose. What Kimberly Ruffin is very nicely handing out for me is a copy of the assignment that I'm going to be referencing most of the time. If you want to look down with someone else, it's I didn't make enough copies for everybody because I didn't know exactly how many people were going to be here today, but just as a point of reference, since I'm not so, like I said, the class that I teach online is Psychology of Racism. This is a class that's a 200 level class that is quite popular within the department because it meets a lot of gen ed requirements. It has historically, now it meets the grounds for change requirement. So a lot of the students I get in my class are students in the spring and summer who are frantically trying to fulfill their gen ed requirements before they graduate and they end up in the online class. I also teach in-person versions of this class. So another goal that I have with my online course is to try to make the content and the learning experience as similar for the in-person students and the online students as I can, while taking advantage of the benefits of each of the formats. So one of the things I always try to do, whether I'm teaching in-person or online the Psychology of Racism, is to integrate current events into the class content and the class structure. Unfortunately, for like the world at large, it's not very difficult to find events related to race or racism that you can incorporate in any given semester. The challenge I have is how to incorporate it in the best way and most meaningful way. By the best way, I'm usually talking about what's going to save me time from having to scour the internet and other resources every single semester trying to find new and different things to use. And also creating structure because, like Sally was talking about, one of the things that I found tends to work best with creating online assignments where students are going to be working together or sharing information with each other in some capacity is to give it some sort of structure. Particularly teaching on a topic like racism online, my fear has always been that it could go off the rails really quickly. So trying to keep it controlled, keep it structured is really important to me. So what you see in front of you, if you have one of the assignment sheets, is something I do about midway through a session, I would say. It's an assignment on hate crimes. So what I make use of, and I do this on a lot of my assignments, is direct students to a particular resource that I found on the web that I really like and find to have good, reliable information. So this one uses the Southern Poverty Law Center's website. They have a lot of great resources on there. The one I orient this assignment around at first is the intelligence report and the, I think they call it the hate map online. So it's a map of the United States. It's interactive in that each state has a number with it, and you can click on a particular state and find out how many active hate groups there are in that state. So usually with the assignment, as you can see, I'll sort of direct them to what hate groups are active in Illinois right now, what hate groups are active in the Chicago area right now. This is a really consistent part of the assignment from semester to semester. The information is going to change as the Southern Poverty Law Center gets new information, but I can keep this consistent every single semester. It still feels current to the students, but I don't have to reinvent the wheel and try to come up with something brand new each semester. So I really like that part of it. As someone who teaches 3 classes a semester, it doesn't have unlimited time to devote to one online class. There are other, and it's always surprising for the students, finding out just how many active hate groups there are in the Chicago area. It's interesting in sort of an unnerving way, maybe, but it's a good learning experience for them. The part that changes a little bit semester to semester is in part 2, where I have them do an investigation of a specific recent hate-related event. So one thing that this website has is their intelligence report, where you can find out hate crimes that the Southern Poverty Law Center is tracking, broken down by state. It'll also list the cities where things are happening. So usually what I'll do before this assignment goes live, I'll double check the site. Number one, to make sure everything is still working properly before I do the assignment. Always a good idea. It seems like a really basic thing, but I can always rely on links to be the same 4 months later as they were the last time you did the class. So I check the website myself, sort of look for what hate-related incidents have gone on recently, so I can sort of try to foresee what students are going to be looking up. I have them read if there are any race-related hate crimes that have happened in the last few months, and unfortunately, like I said, there always are things I can have them write about. And then I have them do their own web, news site investigation, so they can look for stories, examine, well, in the web media, in the popular media, how was this crime reported? I structured the assignment so I'm giving them particular questions that they can talk to each other about, that they can talk to me about in the assignment and post on a discussion board. Again, so things don't go off the rails, it's really important to not just let them spout their opinions at random. Roosevelt students are pretty good about, keeping things normal and not too heated, not too controversial and saying way out there things, but it's good to give them the structure to do that. They go out, they look at how was this story reported in the media. I make them, if they're looking up newspaper articles, finding video feeds, send me the links to everything so I can see what they're looking at. And then, as they're doing things on the discussion board, I'll provide a list of links that people have found about the various crimes they're reporting on, so people can see if, 3 of them found stuff on the same crime, they can see, well, what did each other find? What are they saying about it? People can look at what each other did, and I still have some sort of control over it. The other thing I found, or one of the other things I found with incorporating current events into an online classroom is to avoid the temptation of posting everything you find online. Students have this temptation of just using whatever seems interesting that day to the online classroom. And with things like Blackboard, this is so easy. If I find a news story that's interesting, copy, paste the link, put it in the online classroom. With incorporating current events into the curriculum, the problem is things change. Information changes pretty consistently. For example, related to this hate crime assignment, as I was figuring out what I was going to talk about today, I looked up and saw, all right, if I just looked up hate crimes today, what could I find is going on? Monday, there was a report of a crime in Louisiana. People heard about this? A woman who was burned and the letters KKK were scratched into her car. So this was covered and reported on the day it happened as a hate crime. I started thinking, wow, I can incorporate that into the class I'm teaching right now on psychology of racism. This would be a great link if I were doing it online. By Wednesday, when I came back to preparing a little more for today, I found that, the news had said that the woman actually burned her cell and staged it to be a hate crime, which would still be very interesting in the context of a class discussion, but it would completely shift and change the nature and tenor of that discussion. So students who read something on Monday might have a totally different experience than students who read something on Wednesday, and that could also lead to chaos on things like the discussion board. So it's important incorporating a current events to an online assignment. Current does not have to mean instantaneous. Allowing yourself a little bit of lead time or a little bit of time to really digest information, figure out what are the best sources for myself. What actually is going on with this event is really, really important. The other thing is to try to, again, I'm all about structure, I'm kind of a control freak in many capacities, but especially with the online class, giving them good models for the kind of information I want them to look up on a particular case. Last spring when I was teaching psychology of racism online, the George Zimmerman shooting of Trayvon Martin happened. So a lot of students were wanting to talk about that in the online class environment, which makes total sense because it definitely relates to the topic. Before I created an assignment about it, I actually may have waited a little too long on this one. I waited about 4 weeks before I integrated it into an assignment. But I wanted to make sure that by the time I did it, the information was sort of, getting a little more established. I could find really reliable, good sources of information. Because students often, don't know the difference, or they're not as attuned to what's good web information and what's bad web information. So by the time I incorporated that in, I could come up with some pretty objective source material that I wanted them to refer to for an assignment, look at how that case and the aspects of it related to stuff we had already learned. And then, especially with that case, because it was so heated on both sides, try to keep the discussion relatively neutral, relatively respectful on the part of all the students. Anytime there's a controversial topic that you're trying to do in an online classroom, it's good to present different types of perspective, not rely on one thing. I try to find, it's really hard to find objective, unbiased news reporting these days, but I try to find that to orient the students toward it so they will not, if they're seeking out information, go with just blog posts. Because some blogs are really good, some blog posts are a nightmare to deal with in terms of objective fact. So structuring that and modeling for that, here's what I think is reliable news type information that you should be thinking about when you do this assignment. Providing the model, I think, really goes a long way. So just to wrap up, I think it's a great idea, depending on the course you teach, this could be easier or more challenging. It's a great idea to incorporate current events, what's going on in the world, into your classes. The students in the online psychology of racism class really, really like it. It gets them excited. It gets them seeing how these things relate to the real world. But to keep it going off the rails, the things I advise people to do are lots of structure, lots of good models, and don't rush into it. Take the time on your end to think things through so you don't have time you're spending later trying to wrangle Columbus